If I hadn't already known what kind of game I'd be in for, Princess Tomato and the Salad Kingdom probably wouldn't have been my first pick off the shelf. Looking at the box, you've got some relatively moody looking vegetables and fruits that don't really match the tone of the barely legible screenshots on the back of the box. The description is filled with so many puns and metaphors that there's barely any substance there either. But just beneath that uninformative packaging is one of the most unique experiences I've had on the NES. Not just for its genre, but for its wit, sense of humor, and the unforgettable roller coaster ride of a plot that you'll endure while you play. Princess Tomato and the Salad Kingdom is a first-person perspective adventure game that sets you down in a world where fruits and vegetables are the principal residents. You play as Sir Cucumber, who's returned home only to find that everything has been turned upside down. A time of peace has come to an end after King Broccoli's reign was challenged by the nefarious Minister Pumpkin. The minister has a superiority complex and didn't appreciate the king's efforts to make all citizens equal, so he decided to mount a resistance force and allied with a bunch of farmies to terrorize the people of the Salad Kingdom. As part of his takeover, he also kidnapped Princess Tomato, and it's your job to find and rescue her before she's married off. Even with this high-stakes backstory front and center, the intensity melts away right after you press start. I was immediately smitten with the colorful backdrop of the first few screens, but what took me over even more was the music. Over and above everything else this adventure has on offer, the soundtrack is by far the best part. It has an eclectic range of tunes that fit the tempo of whatever's going on in the story, and apart from maybe one or two songs that are a bit grating, the rest are unforgettable. Because of the nature of the gameplay, you'll be sitting and listening to them for a very long time while your brain grinds out how to make progress. I really didn't tire of the music, even while stroking my metaphorical beard on the 500 loop of most tracks. It's that good. There's also a lot of visual appeal to bask in. Your travels take you from rolling hills into towns and their buildings with lots of interesting people to talk to at every stop along the way. Since most of the game is spent scanning these surroundings for clues about what to do next, I loved how many objects were actually identifiable at first glance without needing further explanation. In the rare instance that I couldn't tell what something was, the game reliably elaborated on important items through the available commands and brought me up to speed. Now, it's far from the best pixel art I've seen on the system, but it was good enough to leave some of the experience to my imagination without also leaving me mystified. On the other hand, when it came to the character design, I was surprised at the inconsistency in the quality of the caricatures. Some people were drawn beautifully, but there were also a bunch that were not so polished, to put it lightly. It almost feels like a lot of different people worked on the portraits without comparing with their fellow designers at any point. The diversity made for some very zany moments. You'd never know if you were going to get a close-up of someone's disheveled face or a very pretty portrait of some produce. If I have to pick a favorite, it's definitely Mr. Corn. His no-nonsense expression and funny dialogue brought me great joy, but he's merely one of the many people you meet that bring a broad array of flavors to the experience. That same whimsical feel extends to the game's sense of humor. There are so many little jokes that dot the twisting storyline, most of which come compliments of your co-pilot Percy the Persimmon. In fact, you very rarely, if ever, hear from Sir Cucumber himself, though if you keep your eyes peeled, you may see his shadow looming once in a while. Because you're working through Percy, interactions with the world around you feel conversational, rather than the more straight-cut factual descriptions that you would get in other games. I really enjoyed Percy's remarking and exclaiming about everything we'd see and encounter. His commentary really lightened the tone a lot and instilled a playfulness into even some of the most intense story moments. That's not to say that the plot doesn't have its highs and lows in emotion, but there's an evenness in these moments of comic relief that falls in line with the sarcastic death quips of old Sierra games from that mean-spirited narrator that's quietly along for the ride. Without Percy in tow for the trek, I don't think that this adventure would have been nearly as fun. With that said though, he wasn't always a source of support and did utter a few lines that really got on my nerves after a while. Things like, "Don't give anything away now," and "That can't be used now," were what he shouted at me every time I chose a wrong command while thinking through a problem. And if Princess Tomato in the Salad Kingdom has one glaring flaw, it's how troublesome it is to actually overcome the many obstacles that block your way. The story's structured into chapters, so it has the benefit of only giving you a small set of items in your inventory to work with at a time, but even still, logic rarely prevails. There are some very frustrating solutions to puzzles where even though you think you have a sound way to approach them, after a while you just end up trying everything with everything else until something works. The worst of it is that occasionally, as you inch your way along, things around you will change without your knowledge. Doors that you previously saw were locked are suddenly open for no reason. Rooms that you visited before and rummaged through will have new items that weren't there before. These changes are not usually connected to whatever you did to trigger them in any meaningful way, which forces a lot of checking and rechecking that's not usually so rampant in games like this. When I got stuck, my strategy was to go all the way back to the first screen of that chapter and retrace my steps while scrutinizing each area and character encounter for differences. This made the experience of making progress feel like less of a reward and more of a relief after exhausting all of my options. The most time-consuming aspect was that there are simply too many similar actions at your disposal to explore things around the Salad Kingdom. Of all of the choices on the side panels, only around half of them are used more than once or twice throughout the entire game. Of the others that were used frequently, several felt redundant in many cases, and I had a hard time figuring out which ones should be used. For example, when a situation called for it, I couldn't decide whether I was supposed to give an item or use it, or whether it was correct to look at something rather than check it. Being wrong so often broke down my confidence and really diminished my enjoyment of the game overall. I always felt like I was fumbling to try to find the correct input path, and try as I might, I just couldn't seem to get into the heads of the people that made this game. This is not a wholly unique experience, and in fact, many other first-person or point-and-click adventures suffer from this singular path-forward syndrome, but it really wore down my patience after a while. I also might have taken my failures much less personally if Percy didn't berate me whenever I made a mistake. All of his exclamation marks on those comments have a special place in hell. Funnily enough, my frustration with the lack of rationale didn't flare up until about halfway through the game. The first few areas were actually pretty forgiving and almost lulled you into a false sense of security before sending any cohesive thinking straight off the rails in later chapters. Because of this, I obviously like the beginning of the quest a lot more than the end, and that's a real shame because it got off to such a great start only to fizzle out before the finale. Thankfully, the entire game isn't just banging your head on the wall trying to get through puzzles. There's what I can only describe as some dungeon crawling to wander through as well. And even though it's part of the game's attract sequence, it still took me by surprise when I got there. There's something about such a drastic gameplay shift, and especially alongside the music that plays there, that gave me this sense of dread that I really haven't experienced in a lot of other games. I absolutely love making maps for this sort of thing, and for anybody considering playing this, don't let this be the thing that scares you off. These sections are more than manageable in terms of their size and scope without making a map, and I'm sure you could get through them without taking the time to draw things out. I personally enjoyed this change of playstyle, if only for a break that it gave me from the main game. There's one additional play mode to touch on, and that's the rock, paper, scissors battles that are essentially boss fights. Every so often you'll run into a challenger that either wants to eat or destroy you, and this kingdom's way of solving disputes is through some friendly finger wars. When I initially read the instructions in the manual about how this all worked, I emerged with more questions than answers. The rock, paper, scissors part makes sense, but the added layer of the look towards or away was very confusing to me without the context of how it plays out in the moment. While I won't get too deep into it here, other than the occasional hint from an NPC about an opponent's strategy, I couldn't decipher any pattern to win these battles reliably. Observing what moves your challenger chooses can sometimes reveal their approach, but I still struggled through many of these fights, and found myself getting through on luck alone. On the right side, you have to lose a lot of battles to trigger any serious repercussions, and I was one of the lucky people that I know that didn't run into a game over playing through this one. All in all, despite its really obtuse logic at times, I'd say that I'd rate Princess Tomato and the Salad Kingdom as a positive experience. I think if finding the correct sequence through each chapter would have been a little more intuitive, along with all of the charm of the characters, the locations, and the dialogue, this would have been an easy favorite for me. As it stands though, without the extra polish on such a principal aspect of the gameplay, it fell short and I didn't end up loving the game nearly as much as I'd hoped to. If you want a killer soundtrack and a quirky storyline to pair with floundering through your puzzles, this is definitely something to try for yourself. Unfortunately, I don't think I'll be picking it up again anytime soon. Before I close out this video, there's one more thing I wanted to mention that I can't stop thinking about. People in this kingdom don't seem to be bothered by the use of their dead for infrastructure purposes. Peanut shell roofs, celery beds, and daikon fences are just a few of the many ways that veggie corpses are repurposed. And while it's obviously not important to the story, it's disturbingly unclear where the line is drawn between the fruits and vegetables that get to live happy lives and those that get turned into furniture. My best guess is that it might have something to do with Minister Pumpkin's plans to scare people to his side of the war by making an example of who he considered to be lesser than him. But that's a heavy thing to imply, and it's never addressed in any way. I would kill for that adorable onion pillow, though.